AI going to fundamentally change the way companies do business? And should you be thinking about the evolution of your company's own business model? Hi, I'm Courtney Baker, and this is AI Know-How from Known Well, helping you reimagine your business in the AI era. As always, I'm joined by Known Well CEO David DeWolf, Chief Product Officer Mohan Rao, and Chief Strategy Officer Pete Buer. We also have a discussion with Michelle Swan, partner and CMO of private equity firm Tercera, to talk about how they see business models shifting in the professional service world and beyond. But first, the news. Pete Buer joins us as always to break down some of the latest AI headlines and how they apply to your business. Hey, Pete.
Hey, Courtney, how are you?
I'm doing good. According to a report headlined from the Washington Post, TurboTax and H&R Block now use AI for tax advice. It's awful. That's part of the headline, by the way. Pete, what did you make from this article?
First, it's worth capturing the content of the story. I'm terrified of doing something wrong, according to the IRS, and this is a cautionary tale, to say the least. So Jeffrey Fowler, the Post author, ran a set of questions through both Intuit and H&R Block's version of their AI tax assistant chat box. By the way, assisted at the same time by two real-life, that is to say human, tax professionals. And AI pretty much dirtied the nest, shall we say, between the two of those different chatbot options. Somewhere between a third and half of the answers were either entirely wrong or were utterly irrelevant to the question that was being asked. One of the tax professionals humorously commented that they weren't too concerned about whether or not they'd lose their job anytime soon. Important to know, like my first call out would have been, well, like, what about transparency? And I will say in both of their cases, both companies had provided disclaimers saying that the chatbot was fairly new, was still being tested, and should be thought of as provisional support, not the final word. But I still wonder about the question of responsibility. Like, is it enough? Is it okay to provide a solution that's half-baked if you just warn people that it's half-baked? I think maybe I'm with Jeffrey Fowler on this one, and the answer should probably be no, particularly when potentially life-changing outcomes are on the line. I think there's also a strategy question called out here as well. I assume the motivation to put half-baked, and forgive me for using that term, but half-baked product out on the market was to get there fast, to get the benefit of first mover advantage. Of course, that's a bit of a moot point because both companies have a half-baked version on the market. So I don't know who ended up getting to market fastest. But is it worth the customer complaints and the Washington Post articles that talk about how bad your offering is if you just happen to get there first? Something tells me that the trade-off math isn't really there. But I guess time will tell, and the Washington Post will report back at some point to let us know how this one plays out.
I feel like Elizabeth Holmes already taught us this lesson, especially when it comes to things like healthcare, financial. Like, there's a certain level of rigor that is just unacceptable, that it has to be a certain level before it can be deployed.
Very good.
All right, next up, Pete, Anthropic made a splash this week with its debut of Claude.ai. The Verge covered the news in an article with the headline of Anthropic says its latest AI bot can beat Gemini and ChatGPT. Pete, what's the takeaway here?
It's a very playground sounding headline, isn't it? Like, we can beat you guys.
I'm better than you, and so is my dad.
So beat them how? Well, I'm glad you asked, and I'm glad I read, because the framework presented in the article for how to think about offerings comparatively was an education in and of itself. So the article compares 3 companies' offerings, but in the end it's actually 7 individual models. So 3 levels of Claude 3 from Anthropic, from the least to the greatest, Haiku, Sonnet, and Opus. 2 from OpenAI, so GPT 3.5 and 4, and then 2 from Google, Gemini Pro and Gemini Ultra. and then compares this set of offerings across 10 sets of evaluative criteria. Different levels of reasoning capability, different types of math that can be executed, ability to evaluate code, et cetera, et cetera. And the punchline is, yes, Claude can beat the other two. Claude 3 at the Opus level can absolutely beat the other two. It at least equals performance, and in some cases outperforms, in particular on graduate level reasoning and math problem solving. Those are the two that really stood out. The takeaway for leaders, though, I think is less about these individual offerings and more about where we are in the product life cycle. We're sort of to a place where things are evolving fast, and it's kind of on you now as a wise consumer to know what evaluative criteria matter to you most, and then to figure out which of the providers offer the best value for money on those criteria.
Pete, thank you as always.
Thank you, Courtney.
We talked on a recent episode about the concept of game-changing AI. This is AI that can disrupt business models or even entire industries. I wanted to talk with David and Mohan about what these changes might actually look like. David, Mohan, today we are going to be talking about some people may roll their eyes, but we're going to be talking about business models. So obviously,
why would you roll your eyes at business models? There's nothing more interesting.
Some would disagree, David,
Really?
But probably for our audience, hopefully they are chomping at the bit. In the last episode, David, you actually mentioned how organizations and our cross-functional work, as that changes, actually the organizations may become flatter. You know, that this collaborative work becomes easier. We have ways that we haven't even thought of to actually get work done. So I want to talk to you about how you're already starting to see business models change. And thinking of Google and their recent layoffs and how that's starting to fundamentally change business models. So I want to just throw this out to you two. How are you already seeing business models change, and how are you expecting them to change as more technology gets rolled out into businesses?
So I want to nitpick actually your premise here, because I think there are a couple of things in that question that I'm not convinced of. So first of all, I don't know if it's a business model shift at Google, for example, when they're doing layoffs, right? What is a business model? A business model is the way that an organization creates economic value. But their fundamental business model of how Google makes money and the economics is still the same. So I think it's important to set that aside for a moment. The second thing that I would say—
Is that true, though? They let go of all their sales reps.
I mean, they still, their value creation is still through the software that they create and provide access to the world, right? It's through search and advertising and their Google Work Suite products and all of those types of innovations in software. That fundamental business model is the same. How they drive growth of it has changed. Their expectations for growth versus profitability has changed, but the business model itself, I think, is the same. And I'm not saying that it won't change the model at Google. I think one of the reasons that they are pivoting to slow down and focus on profit is because when the business model isn't right, you don't accelerate forward at growing the existing business model. You take profits and you reinvest it in reinventing it. And I would suppose that Google is probably thinking about, we're shifting from a world that is data and workflow oriented and about tooling to a data where intelligence is the new value. And how do they plow more into the intelligence they need to create that will be the real economic value of the future? Another great example of this is, did you see that Apple just killed their electronic vehicle, right? The autonomous vehicle that for over a decade they have been building on.
No, yep. Steve Jobs promised us that.
Yeah, no, they killed it. What are they doing? They're putting all of those great minds into their artificial intelligence unit. And I think that is a fundamental shift. They're saying, hey, no longer does the form factor, the device, the car matter. It's now actually about the intelligence. I think that's a warning sign of where economic value is going. It's going towards being able to create this intellectual deduction that previously only humans could do, but scaling that at all costs.
Okay, Mohan, I'm curious, do you have an example of another organization that you are seeing some shifts in their actual business model? Because I think sometimes it's helpful for executives to kind of see these shifts happening in some of these larger organizations. It kind of prompts us to start thinking about our own business models more seriously.
Yeah, you can, again, going back to what a business model is, it's really the theory of your business. All right. So how do you create, how do you deliver, how do you capture value, right? So that's what a business model is. So if you think about companies that have done this already, Amazon is an example that we can all relate to, right? So they've introduced various new products that they sell. I'm talking about Amazon.com now. But also different delivery mechanisms, and they're constantly reinventing what is possible in terms of delivery timeframes, in terms of pickup at the Amazon store or locker or whatever that's called, and they acquired Whole Foods for a reason, right? So these are changes in the business model that are happening, and these are the game-changing models, because you can do it at different levels. You can do it at the level of the individual, where you can have Copilot type AI applications. You can do it at more of how your value streams internally are organized and make that more efficient. But then there is this third layer, which is about new products and services, which is truly the game-changing aspect of the business model that a company can reimagine what they offer. So, Courtney, Amazon is a good example here.
The combination of those offerings and how you bring them together to create a new type of economic value than consumers can find in other places, I think is a fascinating aspect, Mohan. As you walked through that example, I was thinking about our listeners. We have a lot of professional service companies, and the step that Amazon first started taking was evolving from traditional retail to then e-commerce and really thriving in that world. And they started to introduce things like, the overnight delivery and different things like that really started to change the game and create a different type of value for the customer than just buying a product. Now it was the way it was delivered and the convenience of it was packaged into the way they created economic value. I think professional service organizations have been seeing that for a while. Mohan, one of the things you talk about a lot is the productization of services and how having packaged repeatable services versus just bespoke can be so beneficial to a business model. I think it's very related to that point in time Amazon was at when they started providing new types of packaged delivery of those goods.
Yeah, that's a really good point, David. For a professional services company, how do they create value, right? So they can be providing an intangible product or a service, or they can be providing something that's more tangible, that's more project-based, right? So, or it could be a service that they're offering. Be able to productize that, meaning offer something consistently over and over and over, accrues to the business model, if you will, right? So there's more value in that, and you can reimagine how to do it more efficiently and better, but also deliver it in different ways, right? So these are things that you're absolutely right in pointing that out, that this is fully applicable to professional services. But David, do you think sometimes that when PS companies, they are professional services companies, when they offer intangible products, it could be advisory services, it is harder to productize using AI versus companies that do more tangible services for their products? Do you think there's a difference between the two?
I would say the first part of the premise that it's harder to offer intangible services is very true, right? When we're talking about packaging and how you combine those offerings, services by their very nature are very nebulous. And so it's hard to put a box around it. It's hard to package. That said, the second part of your premise was about AI and the intersection there. I actually think that AI for the first time is actually starting to make knowledge tangible. And I have a sense that organizations that are on this journey already of productization are going to find it easier to capture that institutional knowledge that they have and to provide it through brand new business models, right? So a couple examples come to mind, right? One of the ways to productize kind of this knowledge and expertise that professional services firms have had for a while is through benchmarking, for example, helping organizations see how they compare to other organizations. And there's data you can collect in order to do that, right? Can AI take that to the next level? Another example of that is, right, we see a lot of chatbots being created to tap into. We've talked a lot on this podcast about knowledge management, right? A lot of these professional service organizations, what makes them unique is they have these deep experts that have done things that are really unique and compelling in a specific industry multiple times. If you can start to tap into that knowledge base in ways and to be able to scale it in ways you haven't been able to before, because knowledge management takes a step forward, I think that begins to, again, productize that and make it even more tangible, not less tangible. So my great hope for the service industry is actually that the opposite will happen, that something that has been intangible and hard to put your hands around and hard to package will become even more easy to package and will make it more product light so that it has those scalable attributes that people love about software companies.
Yeah, in that sense, professional services companies have in the model that you describe, have an R&D unit where the intellectual property is being created, whichever way it is, and then it's being delivered in a more efficient manner, right?
That's
so,
right.
And there is value in the IP created there.
Absolutely.
I think this is a really interesting conversation and very thought-provoking, because I think this is the next level of where, we talk constantly about AI being transformative in our businesses and how big of a disruption factor this is going to be. But I don't think we really spend a lot of mental cycles on how does it fundamentally change our business models. Our businesses are going to look different, and to start to spend some time envisioning what that might look like. So hopefully this was some good fodder for you as you continue to pursue learning in your own education about AI and how you apply it to your business.
And I want to add one thing just for the take here. We talked in the last episode about organizations and how they're getting flatter. Today, we talked about business models. The thing that sits in the center of all of that, the business model is core to the business, but right in the center is the customer. In order for organizations to be able to pivot business models, they have to know and have intimacy with their clients. And right now, I think that's really hard, especially in professional services, because we don't have tons of data about the client and their preference and how they're perceiving our services and those types of things. And so it's essential that as we shift and pivot these business models, that we really, really, really get good at client intelligence.
David, Mohan, thank you. Are you ready to get started with AI, but unsure whether your company is ready for a full-scale transformation? If so, we've got a great tool for you. Go to knownwell.com/assessment to get a personalized diagnostic for your organization. Michelle Swan, partner and CMO of Tercera, joined Pete Buer recently to talk about how they're looking at AI opportunities for both Tercera and for the portfolio companies they invest in. Also, in a future episode, we'll be bringing you some select clips from the executive roundtable that's referenced in this interview. Stay tuned for that.
Michelle, hi. So nice to see you again. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's nice to be here.
Just to give listeners some context for the conversation, could you give us the introduction to Tercera, please?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So Tercera is an investment firm that specializes in IT professional services. So we're a little bit unique in the private equity space. And more specifically, IT services in these high growth cloud ecosystems. So think Snowflake, AWS, ServiceNow, what we call the Tercera 30. And then segments like digital engineering, cybersecurity, composable IT, and of course, your favorite, AI. So we're a relatively new firm. We've been at it for 4 years or so. Most of the partners in the firm have an operating background. So we've spent decades in professional services. So we We know the unique challenges of growing, starting professional services, people-based businesses, and it's not easy.
I can say it's an awesome set of people because I recently had the incredible good fortune to join you and the Portco team, I guess, for a strategy session that you were holding where the topic of the day was AI strategy for handling and incorporating it into the businesses. I know that you were keeping track across the session. At the end, what were the big takeaways from your perspective?
Yeah, so first of all, thank you for joining us for that. I think presenting to 30 technical leaders is always a challenge, especially when the topic is technology disruption. So appreciate you being there. And it is disruptive. I would say the biggest takeaways for us is just that everybody needs to pay attention to it. I think that everybody in that room was in a little bit of a different space in terms of where they are with AI adoption. Some were all in on it, some were a little bit more hesitant, kind of legging into it, if you will. We did some research beforehand, as you know, where we actually asked folks that were going to be in that room where they were really applying AI in their business. And I think the vast majority of it, 50% of the folks in that room were really focused internally on the internal applications. So development, marketing, how do they apply it to finance, even legal, sales, things like that. And then, ownership, we talked about, who has an owner. Everybody had an owner around it because I think they do realize that in the long run, how disruptive it's going to be for services. And I thought the way that you guys talk about at Known Well AI around these kind of 5 altitudes is really fascinating. I think that folks in the room really appreciated that. That there's the kind of the physical labor at the bottom, then there's the knowledge work, which is really the execution piece, which I think is where most of the folks were focused. And then that operational, like how do you start to weave it into the business across all of these different operations? How do you, really kind of turn the dials in the business using AI and data a little bit more readily? And that was where a lot of the discussion was, nice. I think.
So awesome. That's the perspective from the portfolio companies. How about you at Tercera?
Yeah, so I would say we're still learning. We're still trying to figure out how to use it in our own business. I think I'm also, in addition to being a partner, I'm also our CMO. So we definitely use it on the marketing side. I also run our thought leadership and kind of research piece, which is, some of the research that we do to figure out where to invest, but also that we put out into the world. And that's one of the areas that I think we're really excited what AI can do. We've got a ton of data internally. We have a ton from bankers, from a lot of the conversations that we have with software vendors and these different ecosystems with, we probably talk to 300 different services companies every year. And so how do we take all those learnings and actually put it into some way where we can pull out the trends versus just me sitting and, thinking through it, having lots of conversations? How do we actually use AI to pull out some of these data trends and incorporate it into our research? So we're going to do a whole lot more of that, I think, coming up. And then we're also just thinking about, from an investment standpoint, what does an AI-enabled services company look like in 2 to 3 years? Because our whole investment thesis is we want to invest in services companies that, are going to be high growth over the next 3 to 5 years. So we have to predict the future a little bit. And so really trying to understand what AI is going to do to services companies is, we've got to figure that out.
So you mentioned the word trends. You recently published a blog on 6 trends impacting IT services in 2024, 2 of which are focused on AI. Could you share a little bit on those 2 and the implications?
Sure thing. So we cheat a little bit on our trends. We actually wait until January so we can hear what all the other smart people out there talk about, and then we really talk with our services leaders, lots of other people, about just what the impact of those trends is going to be on services. So 2 of the 6 were AI specific, but I would say AI probably played a role in most of them, to be honest. The first was around AI consulting getting more attention than AI tools. I guess if 2023 was the year of software investments, large language models, a lot of the foundational technology, I think 2024 is really where services gets the attention. You know, companies need to figure out how to use this. They need advisors. They need people to help figure out how to implement it, how to develop around it. And I think we're already seeing that come to pass. I think boards, you know, it's in a lot of the budgets for 2024. But at the same time, I think AI is probably going to get a fair amount of negative attention this year with, you know, with the election, data privacy issues. And so companies are going to need some help navigating that. So that's one. The second one is around artificial intelligence, taking center stage as AI both adds and alleviates risk. You know, bad actors have always figured out how to exploit technology in new ways, especially technology that gets poorly implemented, which is another reason services companies exist out there. And I think we're going to see more of that. We're going to see a lot more cases of AI-generated identities being used to steal information, to pretend to be people, to access different systems. And you might remember at our leadership retreat, we did this kind of funny thing to open up the day where we actually fed video of our CEOs talking
awesome.
a little bit of smack about their investors. And, you know, it took 30 seconds of video. We wrote a script, we put it into a free tool, and we got them to say whatever we wanted them to say. And I think it was a little eye-opening.
It was awesome as they sat in the room watching themselves say ridiculous things on the screen.
Yeah, so I think that artificial identity is going to be an interesting trend. And, you know, the companies are also using AI too, though, to remediate these threats, to kind of predict the ones that are going to happen. So I think it's a little bit on both sides.
The overarching topic of this episode is around how business models are changing due to AI. And you referenced, as you were talking about, kind of thinking differently, looking forward from an investment perspective, services companies that are powered by AI. Do you have a developing view on where and how business models will change the most and the types of changes maybe that will be the most noteworthy?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think we've got some theses that thesi, not quite sure what the word is there. But, you know, it's still early days. I think one of the biggest questions we've got in our mind, though, is services firms have, you know, they've grown their revenue alongside headcount. It's time and materials, you know, it's easy to predict those businesses. I mean, you need to hire this many people next year if you're going to get this amount of revenue. I think that's going to change with AI. And you're already starting to see it. You know, I think last year, the GSIs, the global systems integrators, the Accentures, Deloittes of the world, you know, they declined the headcount for the first time ever. And a lot of it was the macro stuff. And I think we will see hiring probably increase, but not at the level that we did before, because I think a lot of these firms are starting to figure out how to use tools and technology to squeeze more productivity out of the people who they do have. And in a lot of cases, maybe even act a little bit more like a software company. Where they actually, you know, are putting some of these platforms together to go to market with. Yeah. So that's one of the things. I mean, and just I think you're going to see AI impact pretty much everything around a services firm. From, you know, it's one thing that we've talked a little bit about with your background in, you know, HR and people operations, is just how you hire, onboard, train people is going to fundamentally change with AI. And we're already seeing it. One of our portfolio companies actually is just put out these kind of co-pilots where they're actually helping their newer employees access a lot of the tools and documentation and things that they've done in the past. And so they can be a lot more productive for clients way faster than they used to be.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, it's all drivers of scale. You know, the linear model of talent building kind of, I guess, is yesterday's framework. And now, you know, we're doing everything we can to figure out how to get more unit by unit from the people and how to scale faster too. So we recently hosted a roundtable with professional services CEOs, and I know Tercera was in attendance. Anything jump out at you from that discussion?
Yeah, I mean, so my background actually is in customer experience. So I used to run our customer experience voice of the customer programs at a company called Aperio. And so I think one of the things that I found most interesting is just how do you use real data, tone analysis, concrete things to actually figure out what the health of a customer is and how likely they would be to attrit. I feel like that's always been a little bit of the holy grail, but it feels like we're a lot closer to that than we used to be. So few services firms right now do customer sat well. Most of them don't even have an NPS or a real CSAT program. Those who do tend to measure it at the end of projects or at the end of every year, or they have a salesperson for a QBR that's like, I think it's green. I'll just put green on the slide. And so having real data to show, what could possibly happen with some of these customers and who could potentially attrit. I think that's really interesting. And for an investor, if we could actually see that in a concrete way for a company that we're potentially investing in, that's a bit of a game changer.
Michelle, it's been a pleasure. We love spending time with you. We love spending time with Tercera. And so thank you for coming and sharing your insights and your perspectives.
Thanks. The feeling is mutual.
Thanks as always for listening and watching. Don't forget to give us a 5-star review on your podcast player or over on YouTube. And we'd really appreciate it if you would share this episode on social media. At the end of every episode, we like to get one of our AI friends to weigh in on the topic. So, hey, ChatGPT, long time no see. This episode, we're talking about 3 ways business models are changing due to AI. What's your top 3?
Oh, it's been a minute, hasn't it? So, the big changes I'm seeing with AI in the biz scene are all about making customer experiences super personalized, cutting down on costs with automation, and launching completely new kinds of businesses that we hadn't even dreamed of before.
And now you're in the know. Thanks as always for listening or watching. We'll be back next week with more headlines, roundtable discussions, and interviews with AI experts.